Now we're going to continue with how to create a frequency table in histogram. We've made our frequency table. Following our rules, we created equal intervals, and we know that those are going to go on our x-axis on our histogram. Now we're going to follow the rules for histogram to take what we took, our example about the children at the zoo, and take our histogram and move it into, or take our frequency table and move it into a histogram here at the bottom. And so, again, I tried to say earlier that a histogram looks very similar to a bar graph, except that the bars touch in a histogram. So the first thing that we're going to do is choose a scale for the y-axis to represent the frequency. Our y-axis on our histograms will always be titled frequency. And in this case, our frequencies were 3, 2, 2, 4, 3. So I'm just going to have a scale of 1 for my frequencies. We start at 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. I'm just going to go up by 1 because all of my data will fit if I go up by 1. Then it says label the x and y axis on the graph. We're always going to label y-axis frequency. We're going to label the x-axis not with the actual word intervals, but what the intervals represent. And the intervals here represent children at the zoo. And so our intervals goes on our x-axis. This is children. And we're going to label our intervals here within each bar. So from here to here is going to be our first interval, 91 through 100. Our next interval was 101 through 120, 121 through 130, 131 through 140. So I talked earlier about how our bars will touch. We want these to be all stacked right next to each other so that from here to here is our 91 to 100 bar, 101 to 120 is here. Oh, and this, I'm sorry, this should be 110. I got off. And then this should be 111 to 120, 121 to 130, and then 131 through 140. I apologize for that mistake. So 91 to 100, 101 through 120, or 101 through 110, 111 through 120, 121 through 130, and 131 through 140. So now that I've got my x and y axis labeled, I need to title my graph. This is zoo attendance. That's what we're talking about here. Zoo attendance. That's not the only title you could use. You could say number of children at the zoo or something like that. I'm just going to kind of word it myself and say zoo attendance. The most important thing is that we actually put a title here to show what we're representing in our histogram. After we title, we can draw a bar for each frequency. So now that we've got all of our axis labels on here, we've got our title, we've got things listed, numbers, we can now graph each bar. So from 91 to 100, the frequency was 3, and so from 91 to 100, I'm going to draw a bar that goes up to the 3 on the frequency and fill it in here. Then I have 101 to 110, the frequency was 2. So on my histogram, 101 to 110, I'm going to go up to the frequency of 2. Remember that our bars are going to touch in a histogram. So if you go back to your rules, bars must touch. This is the difference between a histogram and a bar graph. Histograms have intervals and their bars touch. So then 111 to 120, up here in my frequency table, 111 to 120 had a frequency of 2. So I'll graph another bar of 2 here. Bars are touching. 121 to 130, when I look at my frequency table, 121 to 130 had a frequency of 4. There were 4 days where 121 through 130 students came through. And so 1, 2, 3, 4. fill in my graph. And then 131 through 140, there were 3 days. I had a frequency of 3, and so this last bar is going to have a frequency of 3. And we're good. And so what we've done now is we've created a histogram. We've created something that looks similar to a bar graph, but has intervals and bars touch. Notice that we have a title and we have labels on both our X and Y axis with our numbers. It's super duper important that you have all of those pieces in your histogram.